The howling winds carried something more sinister than dust across the rugged Montana plains, as Bethany Collins clutched her infant son to her chest, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frightened bird. The wolves had appeared from nowhere, materializing from the tall grass like ghosts, their amber eyes fixed on her with a hunger that turned her blood to ice. She had ventured too far from the homestead, and now as the circle of predators tightened around her, Bethany wondered if she'd ever see another sunrise. It was 1878, a harsh spring following an even harsher winter in the unforgiving Montana territory. Bethany had come west with dreams that now seemed foolish as she backed against a boulder, her baby beginning to stir against her chest. The wolves, 6 of them, moved with calculated precision, their low growls vibrating through the evening air. "Don't move, madam," came a steady voice from somewhere behind her. "Hold the baby tight, I'll hold the gun steady." The stranger's words were calm, measured, as if talking about the weather and not a life-or-death standoff with a pack of starving wolves. Bethany didn't dare turn to look, but she could hear the soft crunch of boots on the rocky ground. A tall figure moved into her peripheral vision, the fading sunlight glinting off the barrel of his rifle. He wore a dust-covered duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but it was his eyes that caught her attention, clear blue and unflinching as they assessed the threat. "Lucas Whitaker," he said without taking his eyes off the wolves. "When I give the word, you start backing toward my horse. Slow and steady." The nearest wolf, a massive gray beast with a scarred muzzle, took another step forward. The man Lucas fired a warning shot into the ground, causing the animal to leap back, but it didn't retreat. "Now," Lucas whispered. "One step at a time." Bethany clutched her baby closer, his small warmth the only thing keeping her from giving in to panic. She took one careful step backward, then another. The wolves shifted, uncertain but not deterred. "Keep going," Lucas encouraged, his rifle trained on the pack leader. 20 agonizing steps later, they reached his horse, a sturdy buckskin that stood remarkably calm despite the danger. With practiced skill, Lucas helped her mount while keeping his aim steady. "Wrap your arm around my waist," he instructed as he swung up behind her. "Don't let go." Bethany did as she was told, securing the baby between them as Lucas urged the horse into a gallop. The wolves gave chase briefly before disappearing into the growing darkness, their howls echoing across the plains like mournful ghosts. They rode hard for nearly an hour before the outline of a small cabin appeared against the twilight sky. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and safety. "My place," Lucas explained as he helped her dismount. "It's not much, but the wolves won't bother us here." The baby, remarkably quiet throughout their ordeal, now began to fuss. The tiny whimper seemed to soften something in Lucas's weathered face. "How old?" he asked, nodding toward the bundle in her arms. 4 months, Bethany answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "His name is Thomas." Inside the cabin, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the simple but tidy space. A bed stood in one corner, a table with 2 chairs in another, and shelves lined with books, an unexpected sight that momentarily distracted Bethany from her fear. "You raid," she observed, bouncing Thomas gently to soothe him. Lucas hung his hat on a peg by the door. Not much else to do during the winter months. There was no defensiveness in his tone, just matter-of-fact honesty. He set about preparing a simple meal while Bethany tended to Thomas. The domesticity of the scene felt strange after their harrowing escape, but the normalcy was comforting. "What brought you out so far from town with a little one?" Lucas asked as he placed a bowl of stew before her. Bethany hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger who had saved their lives. "My husband died last winter, pneumonia. The bank foreclosed on our homestead last week." The words felt hollow, inadequate to describe the devastation of the past months. Lucas nodded, requiring no further explanation. Out here, such stories were all too common. "Where were you headed?" "My sister has a place near Helena. I was trying to reach the stage-coach station when I got turned around." Bethany spooned some stew into her mouth, surprised by how hungry she was. I'm not used to finding my way out here alone. Montana territory isn't forgiving to those who don't know its ways, Lucas said, his voice neither judgmental nor pitying. But you showed courage out there. Not everyone keeps their wits when facing down wolves. A small smile touched Bethany's lips for the first time in what felt like forever. I didn't have much choice. It was either stay calm or... She glanced down at Thomas, now sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle Lucas had arranged from a drawer. You'll stay here tonight, Lucas decided. I'll take you to the station in the morning. It's about half a day's ride from here. That night, Bethany slept in Lucas's bed while he made himself comfortable on a pallet near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every howl of the wind sounded like wolves, and she found herself checking on Thomas constantly. During one such moment, she noticed Lucas was awake too, staring into the dying embers of the fire. You should sleep, he said without looking at her. We've got a long ride tomorrow. Thank you, Bethany whispered, for saving us for all of this. Lucas nodded, his profile strong against the faint firelight. Anyone would have done the same. But Bethany knew better. In her year out west, she'd learned that kindness wasn't something to be taken for granted. Not everyone, she said softly. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Lucas was already up, cooking breakfast and checking his gear. Thomas was awake too, cooing contentedly as Bethany changed his wrappings. He's a good baby, Lucas observed, setting plates on the table. Hardly makes a fuss. Bethany smiled with motherly pride. He's strong, like his father was. She ran a gentle finger over Thomas's cheek. Sometimes I look at him and see John so clearly it hurts. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Loss was something everyone in these territories understood all too well. After breakfast, they prepared to leave. Bethany noticed Lucas packing more supplies than seemed necessary for a half-day journey. Is something wrong? She asked as he strapped an extra canteen to his saddle. Lucas paused, considering his words. Storm's coming. I can feel it in my bones. We might need to find shelter along the way. The sky was clear blue, but Bethany had learned not to question such instincts. The weather in Montana could turn deadly with little warning. They set out as the sun climbed higher, Thomas secured in a sling across Bethany's chest. Lucas rode slightly ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The landscape was beautiful in the spring light, wildflowers dotting the grasslands with splashes of color. Have you lived out here long? Bethany asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. 10 years, Lucas replied. Came out after the war with nothing but my horse and rifle, built that cabin with my own hands. The war between the states, Bethany asked, though she knew the answer. Lucas had that look about him, the quiet watchfulness of a man who had seen too much. He nodded. Union cavalry. Seemed easier to head west than go back home to Virginia afterward. Too many ghosts. Bethany understood that all too well. That's why John and I came out here too, for a fresh start. She gazed across the rolling plains. It wasn't what we expected. Lucas glanced back at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Rarely is, but there's beauty in this harshness if you know how to look. By midday, dark clouds had indeed gathered on the western horizon, moving with alarming speed toward them. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. There's a line shack about an hour from here, Lucas said, eyeing the approaching storm. We'll shelter there until it passes. They pushed the horse harder, and Bethany could feel Lucas's tension as the storm closed in. The first fat raindrops began to fall just as a small wooden structure came into view, nestled against a stand of cottonwood trees. The line shack was primitive but solid, built to withstand the elements. Lucas quickly got a fire going in the small stove while Bethany tended to Thomas, who had begun to fuss with the changing pressure. Outside, the storm unleashed its fury. Rain lashed against the walls and thunder shook the tiny building. Bethany jumped at a particularly loud crack. It's all right, Lucas assured her, his voice steady. This place has weathered worse. As darkness fell, the storm showed no signs of abating. Lucas prepared a simple meal from his supplies and they sat close to the stove for warmth. "Looks like we'll be here tonight," he said, watching the rain sheet down the single window. "We'll head out at first light." Bethany nodded, a strange mixture of relief and nervousness settling over her. There was something about Lucas Whitaker that made her feel safe, yet she hardly knew him. "How did you know?" she asked suddenly. "About the wolves, I mean. How did you happen to be there right when I needed help?" Lucas was quiet for so long that Bethany thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low. "I was tracking that pack. They've been causing trouble for miles around, taking down calves from my small herd and others. I was following their trail when I heard your baby." The simplicity of the explanation touched Bethany more than any heroic tale might have. This was the way of life out here, people helping people because that was what survival required. Thomas began to cry, his little face scrunching up in hunger. Bethany unbuttoned her dress to feed him, then hesitated, suddenly conscious of Lucas's presence. Sensing her discomfort, Lucas stood and moved to the door. "I'll check on the horse," he said, slipping outside despite the downpour. By the time he returned, soaked to the skin, Bethany had finished feeding Thomas and had settled him to sleep in a nest of blankets. She watched as Lucas removed his wet coat and hung it near the stove. "You didn't have to go out in that," she said quietly. "I wouldn't have minded." Lucas ran a hand through his damp hair. "A man should give a woman her privacy." Something about his old-fashioned courtesy warmed Bethany in a way the fire couldn't. In the year since John's death, she'd grown accustomed to fighting her own battles, to the hardness required to survive as a widow. Lucas's simple act of respect reminded her of gentler times. The storm continued through the night, its fury gradually diminishing to a steady rain. Bethany slept fitfully, waking often to check on Thomas or listen to the rain. During one such moment, she found Lucas awake too, sitting by the window, his expression distant. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked softly. He turned, seeming unsurprised that she was awake. "Old habits. The war taught me to sleep light." Bethany wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him by the window. "My father was the same way after he came back from the Mexican War. He'd patrol the house every night, checking doors and windows." "The vigilance stays with you," Lucas agreed. "Sometimes it keeps you alive out here." They sat in companionable silence, watching the rain through the clouded glass. There was comfort in this shared quiet, a connection forming without words. Morning broke clear and golden, the storm having swept away during the night. The world outside the lined shack seemed washed clean, glistening with raindrops that caught the early light. They set out after a quick breakfast, the horse picking its way carefully through muddy terrain. The stagecoach station was visible by mid-morning, a collection of sturdy buildings marking civilization. As they approached, Bethany felt an unexpected reluctance. Her time with Lucas had been brief but intense, a shared experience that had created a bond she hadn't anticipated. "Will you be all right from here?" Lucas asked as they stopped a short distance from the station. Bethany nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. The thought of continuing her journey alone suddenly seemed daunting. "Yes, the stage to Helena should come through tomorrow." Lucas helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. Thomas babbled happily in his sling, reaching a tiny hand toward Lucas's face. "He likes you," Bethany observed, smiling as Lucas let the baby grasp his finger. "He's a good judge of character," Lucas replied, a rare smile transforming his serious face. "Just like his mother." The compliment brought unexpected heat to Bethany's cheeks. "I don't know about that. I've made plenty of poor judgments. Yet here you are, keeping this little one safe against all odds." Lucas gently freed his finger from Thomas's grip. "That takes courage and good sense." The station manager came out to greet them, eyeing Lucas with recognition. "Whitaker. Didn't expect to see you before the cattle drive." Lucas nodded in greeting. "Just escorting Mrs. Collins to catch the stage to Helena." The manager, a grizzled man named Harkins, turned his attention to Bethany. Stage won't be through until tomorrow afternoon, madam. Had some trouble at the river crossing with all this rain. Bethany's heart sank. Another day of waiting, of stretching her meager funds. Is there somewhere in town I could stay? Harkins scratched his beard. Town's just a trading post and a saloon, madam. No proper accommodations for a lady and child. She'll stay at my place tonight, Lucas said, his tone brooking no argument. I'll bring her back tomorrow for the stage. Relief and something else, something warmer, flooded through Bethany at his words. One more day in his company didn't seem like a hardship at all. The ride back to Lucas's cabin was different from their outward journey. The tension of escape was gone, replaced by an easy companionship. Lucas pointed out landmarks, shared stories of his early days in the territory, and even laughed at Bethany's tale of her first disastrous attempt at making sourdough bread. John said it could have been used to repair the roof, she recalled, the memory bringing a smile rather than pain for the first time. He was right, too. It was that hard. Lucas chuckled. My mother always said cooking was an art best learned through failure. Sounds like you were on your way to mastering it. I've improved, Bethany assured him, though I haven't attempted sourdough again. Maybe you should, Lucas suggested. I'd be willing to risk my teeth on the result. The casual offer hung in the air between them, a suggestion of future possibilities that neither was ready to acknowledge. Back at the cabin, Bethany insisted on cooking dinner to repay Lucas's hospitality. He watched with undisguised appreciation as she transformed his simple provisions into a hearty meal. You've got a knack for making something out of nothing, he observed as they ate. That's a valuable skill out here. Bethany smiled, pleased by his praise. Necessity teaches quickly. After John died, I had to learn to make do with less and less. Lucas's expression grew serious. It's not right what happened to you, the bank taking your land while you were still grieving. It's the way of things, Bethany replied, though the injustice still stung. Women alone don't fare well in this territory. It doesn't have to be that way, Lucas said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the table. There are good people here too, people who look out for each other. As night fell, they sat before the fire, Thomas sleeping peacefully nearby. Bethany worked on mending one of Lucas's shirts that she'd noticed had a torn sleeve while he cleaned his rifle. You don't have to do that, Lucas said, nodding toward the mending. I don't mind, Bethany replied. It's nice to feel useful. Lucas set aside his rifle. You are far more than useful, Bethany Collins. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. The use of her given name sent a small thrill through her. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her as a woman, not just as a widow or a mother. What will you do in Helena? Lucas asked, his voice carefully neutral. Bethany considered the question. My sister's husband owns a general store. They've offered to let us stay until I find work, perhaps as a seamstress or laundress. Lucas nodded, but something in his expression suggested dissatisfaction with her answer. And that's what you want, to work for others after having your own land. What choice do I have? Bethany countered, a flash of her old spirit showing through. I'm a woman alone with a child. Society doesn't offer us many paths. You could stay, Lucas said abruptly, then seemed surprised by his own words. Here, I mean, in this area. Bethany's hands stilled in her lap. And do what exactly? Lucas stood and paced to the window, his back to her. I've got land, more than I can work alone, a small herd starting to grow. The cabin needs improvements, especially with a child around, but it's solid. Bethany's heart began to race, understanding what he was struggling to say. Lucas, he turned to face her, resolution in his eyes. I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. That would be too soon for both of us. But I am offering partnership, a chance to build something together on your own terms. The offer left Bethany speechless. It was both less and more than she'd expected, not a romantic declaration, but something perhaps more valuable, respect and opportunity. Why would you do this for a woman you barely know? She finally asked. Lucas's expression softened. Because in 2 days, I've seen more strength and grace in you than in most people I've known for years. because that boy deserves a chance to grow up on the land. And because he hesitated, seeming to search for the right words, because I've been alone a long time and I'm tired of it. The honesty of his admission touched something deep within Bethany. Here was a man who didn't hide behind pretty words or false promises, who offered what he could with integrity. "I can't answer tonight," she said carefully. "This isn't a decision to make in haste." Lucas nodded, accepting her caution. "The stage will be there tomorrow whenever you decide." That night, sleep eluded Bethany entirely. She lay awake, weighing possibilities against practicalities. Her sister's home offered security but dependency. Lucas's proposition meant risk but also freedom. And then there was the man himself, honorable, steady, kind to her child. In just 2 days, he had shown her more consideration than she'd received in a year of widowhood. There was something between them, a connection she couldn't deny. Morning arrived with clarity. Bethany found Lucas outside, chopping wood with methodical precision. She watched him for a moment, appreciating the strength and purpose in every movement. "I've made my decision," she said when he paused to wipe his brow. Lucas set down the axe, his expression guarded. "And I'll stay," Bethany said, her voice stronger than she felt, "on one condition." "Name it." "This is a true partnership. I won't be a charity case or a housekeeper. We share the work, the decisions, everything." Lucas's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his features. "I wouldn't want it any other way." The weeks that followed were busy ones. Bethany wrote to her sister explaining her decision, receiving a cautious but supportive reply along with her few remaining possessions sent by freight wagon. Lucas extended the cabin, adding a small bedroom for Thomas and improving the main living space. They fell into a rhythm together, each bringing different skills to their partnership. Bethany's garden flourished under her care, while Lucas tended the growing herd. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, gradually revealing the layers of their lives to each other. Bethany learned about Lucas's family in Virginia, all lost to the war in one way or another. He learned about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her dreams of becoming a teacher before marriage changed her path. Thomas thrived in the open air, growing stronger each day. He took his first steps on the cabin floor, Lucas and Bethany each holding out their hands to encourage him. The first time Lucas called him son was an accident, slipping out naturally as he showed the boy a newborn calf. Bethany, overhearing, felt no objection rise within her. Instead, she felt a sense of rightness, of family being reformed from broken pieces. Summer flowed into autumn, bringing the harvest and cattle sales. Their partnership proved profitable, allowing for improvements to the property and savings for the future. Neighbors, initially curious about their unconventional arrangement, came to accept and even admire what they had built together. It was on a crisp October evening with the first hints of winter in the air that everything changed. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Thomas was already asleep inside, exhausted from a day of toddling around the yard. "I think it's time we talked about the future," Lucas said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of nervousness Bethany had never heard before. "Oh," she replied, though her heart had begun to race. Lucas turned to face her, taking her hand in his. "When you came here, I offered partnership because it seemed the right thing for both of us. I didn't want to pressure you with more." Bethany nodded, remembering those early days of cautious hope. "But things have changed," Lucas continued. "At least for me." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I've fallen in love with you, Bethany Collins. With your strength, your kindness, the way you sing to Thomas when you think no one's listening. The way you've made this place a home." Tears pricked at Bethany's eyes. These were words she'd both hoped for and feared. Hoped because her own feelings had grown beyond partnership, feared because loving again meant risking loss. "I'm not asking you to forget John," Lucas said softly. "He'll always be Thomas's father, always be part of who you are. But I'm asking if there might be room in your heart for me too." Bethany looked at their joined hands, weathered from work but stronger together. There already is, she whispered. I think there has been since you found us in that field. Since you said hold the baby tight, I'll hold the gun steady. Lucas's smile was like the breaking of dawn. Then will you marry me, Bethany, make official what I think we've both known for some time? Yes, she replied without hesitation. Yes, I will. He kissed her then, gentle at first, then with a passion that had been building between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Bethany laughed with pure joy. What's funny? Lucas asked, his arm secure around her shoulders. Life, she answered, leaning into his embrace. How it can change so completely in an instant. One moment I was cornered by wolves, certain we would die. The next, you appeared like something from a story, and now here we are. Here we are, Lucas agreed, his voice filled with wonder. A family. They married 2 weeks later in the small church that served the scattered ranches of the area. Thomas, now walking confidently, carried the rings on a small pillow, his face serious with the importance of his task. That night, after Thomas was asleep in his room, husband and wife came together in a union that sealed their bond with passion and tenderness. Bethany, who had feared she might compare, found instead that love created its own unique space, honoring the past while embracing the present. Spring arrived again, bringing with it new life. The cattle herd had doubled, the garden expanded, and Bethany's belly had rounded with their child, due in early summer. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Lucas took Bethany and Thomas to a special spot on their property, a gentle rise overlooking a meadow bright with wildflowers. There, he had erected a simple marker. What's this? Bethany asked, curious. A reminder, Lucas replied, his arm around her waist. Of where our story began, not here exactly, but with danger and courage and trust. Bethany read the words carved into the wooden plaque. Hold tight to what matters, the rest will follow. It's perfect, she whispered, thinking of how far they had come from that terrifying moment. Thomas, now nearly 2, ran through the meadow chasing butterflies, his laughter carrying on the breeze. I've been thinking, Lucas said, watching his adopted son with pride. About names for the new baby. Bethany smiled, her hand resting on her stomach where their child grew strong. And what have you decided? If it's a boy, John, Lucas said quietly. To honor the man who gave you Thomas. If it's a girl, Hope, because that's what you brought back to my life. Tears filled Bethany's eyes as she turned to embrace her husband. I love you, Lucas Whitaker, more than I ever thought possible after losing John. And I love you, Bethany Whitaker, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. You and our children, both born and unborn, are the greatest gift I could have imagined. As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky with brilliant colors, the family made their way back to the cabin that had become a true home. Where once Bethany had faced death with only her infant son to protect, she now walked surrounded by love and the promise of a future brighter than she had dared to dream. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled not in hunger or threat, but in harmony with the wild beauty of the land that had brought them together.